He walked free after 30 felonies. 30. And yet, he still believed he could outrun consequence. For years, his name echoed through city blocks, whispered in corners of Atlanta, scribbled in police reports in Detroit, and cursed in courtrooms across Chicago. Every arrest, every conviction, every escape, it was as if justice had forgotten his address. But not this time. This time, his freedom would be the beginning of his end. Because the final mistake wasn't just another crime, it was the one that would break everything he'd built. He thought he could disappear into a quiet life, fade behind a new name, start again. But you can't bury 30 sins beneath fresh soil. Sooner or later, something grows back. And it did, in the shape of a single, reckless decision. One that began on a calm Friday night in Houston. The sound of passing cars, the hum of streetlights, the rhythm of a man pretending to be ordinary. But under that stillness, a mind restless, a heart too proud to change. He had walked through every prison gate in America, Philadelphia, Memphis, St. Louis, and each time he swore it was the last. But when you've lived a lifetime of running, the quiet feels too loud. He told people he'd turned over a new leaf. A steady job, church on Sundays, even a smile for the neighbors. But every morning, when he looked in the mirror, the reflection staring back wasn't a man redeemed. It was a man rehearsing his next lie. And that's the thing about people like him, they don't just break laws. They break the illusion that change is easy. And when you hear what he did next, you'll understand why some men should never be given freedom twice. Some people need a miracle to change. Others need a downfall. He didn't know it yet, but his downfall had already started with one phone call. An old friend from Detroit, an offer he couldn't resist, and a promise that sounded too clean to be true. They called it a simple job. But nothing about his life had ever been simple. He hesitated for a moment, then said yes. That one word sealed his fate. He thought he was walking back into the shadows for one last payday. But what he was really walking into was a trap set by his own past. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments below. He believed freedom was forever. He believed the streets still owed him one more chance. He believed he was smarter than the system. He was wrong. Because what came next would make even the detectives who'd chased him for years stop and say, wait, what just happened? No one, not his friends, not the cops, not even him, knew this would be his final crime. And when it was over, the man who'd cheated justice 30 times over would finally face it. But not in the way anyone expected. Sometimes, it isn't prison that breaks a man. It's the moment he realizes he deserves to be there. He thought his past was over. But what happened next isn't just about him, it's about something that could happen to anyone. Because hidden inside this story is a lesson that could save a life. A truth that every parent, every friend, and every family member should hear. Stay with me, because later in this story, I'll show you how to protect your loved ones from becoming someone else's next mistake. What you'll learn might change the way you look at safety forever. Houston, Texas. A city that hums with noise, traffic, and second chances, but not everyone gets to keep theirs. He walked out of Huntsville Correctional just 6 months ago. 30 felonies behind him. 1,000 regrets locked somewhere deeper than the scars on his hands. Now, he's a mechanic, or at least, that's what the paperwork says. The smell of burnt oil fills the air, mixing with the metallic taste of sweat. Engines roar, air compressors hiss, and every turn of a wrench sounds like an echo from a life he's trying to forget. But the past doesn't fade. It lingers like grease, impossible to wash off completely. He clocks in early, always the first to show up. Keeps his head down, doesn't talk much. The other guys call him T. They don't know it stands for a name that once filled police scanners from Atlanta to Detroit. To them, he's just another ex-con trying to rebuild what's left. But to himself, he's a man standing on borrowed time. He tells himself this new life is different. A small apartment, a steady job, a quiet neighborhood where the loudest thing at night is the buzz of streetlights. No gangs, no guns, no heat, just peace, the kind that feels too fragile to last. Peace, after all, isn't a gift for men like him, it's bait. Every week, his parole officer visits. A man named Daniels, tall, cold-eyed, but not unkind. Daniels believes in giving people a fair shot, but he's seen too many fall back into the same pit. "You're doing good, Terrence," he says once, tapping his clipboard. Just keep your head clean. Terrence nods. But inside, he knows the head's clean. The soul isn't. He walks home through the same street every night past the gas station, the church on the corner, and the stray dog that always watches him from across the road. It's almost peaceful. Almost. And then there's her, the woman next door. Her name is Carla. Soft voice, warm smile, always leaving extra food at his door. She doesn't know who he was, only who he's pretending to be. Sometimes she talks about faith, forgiveness, starting over. He listens, but never says much. Because some people can start over, and others can only count how many times they've failed to. But even she can't see it, the shadow that's been following him since the day he walked free. He feels it sometimes. When he locks up the shop at night, when a car slows too long by his street, when a number he doesn't recognize flashes on his phone, and the voice on the other end doesn't speak, just breathes. The city feels alive with eyes. Watching, waiting. At work, he tries to drown it out with the grind of metal and the thump of old rock radio. But guilt has its own soundtrack, and it's louder than engines. There's a moment one afternoon he's bent under a car hood, wiping grease from his palms, when he catches his reflection in the chrome bumper. And he freezes. Because for half a second, he doesn't see himself. He sees the man he used to be. The one with the wild eyes, the smirk, the chaos. The ghost he can't bury. He blinks, and it's gone. But his hands are shaking. He lights a cigarette outside the shop. Looks up at the sky. Maybe I was never meant to change, he whispers. He doesn't realize how true that sentence is not yet. That night, Carla invites him to dinner. Homemade stew, laughter, the smell of candles, and cinnamon. It's the first time in years he feels normal. She tells him her brother died young, wrong crowd, bad decisions, never got the chance to fix it. He looks at her, quietly wondering if she'd still smile like that, if she knew who was sitting across from her. After dinner, he helps her wash the dishes. Her hands brush his. It's simple human, something he hasn't felt in decades. And yet, deep down, he feels it. That same pull, the one that always comes right before life, takes everything away again. Because for every quiet night there's always a storm building in the dark. 1 week later, a letter arrives. No return address. Just his name. Inside, one line. Long time T. You owe us. He stares at it for a long time, his pulse pounding in his ears. That old name, the one he buried, is back. He rips up the letter and throws it away, but the words stay burned in his mind. That night, he can't sleep. Every sound outside makes him flinch, a door slam, a passing car, a whisper of wind against the glass. He gets up, walks to the window, looks out, nothing. But in the distance, under a flickering streetlight, a black car sits idling. And for just a second, he sees a face in the driver's seat staring right back at him. By morning, the car is gone. But the fear isn't. He skips breakfast, walks to work, keeps his head down. Daniels calls that afternoon, reminding him about his next check-in. Stay out of trouble, Terrence. I mean it this time. He laughs nervously. Yeah, I'm trying. But inside, something's unraveling. That night, another letter slides under his door. This one with a photograph. It's a picture of him at the shop, last Tuesday. The note says, "Don't make us come find you." He sits on the floor, staring at it. Hands trembling. Heart pounding. The air feels heavy, thick with the smell of fear and old smoke. He knows what's coming. He just doesn't know when. He wants to run, but where? He's done running his whole life. Maybe it's time to face what's been chasing him. He lights another cigarette. Walks out to the porch. The street is empty, silent. But something about the quiet feels wrong. Like the city is holding its breath. In the distance, thunder rolls. A storm is coming, and this time, it has his name on it. Because redemption doesn't always come in peace. Sometimes it comes in blood. He thought he'd escaped the darkness. But the truth is, darkness doesn't chase you. It waits for you to slip. If you believe that people like him shouldn't get to hide behind second chances they don't deserve, hit subscribe right now. Only those who defend corruption would scroll past without standing for justice. And if you think some crimes deserve to be remembered, not buried, share this video so his story never fades. Because the storm isn't coming, it's already here. Before Houston, before the quiet life and the mechanic shop, there was another version of him, the one people whispered about in alleyways. The one detectives in 3 states swore they'd bring down one day. They called him Ghost. No one knew his real name. No one ever saw him twice. By the time cops showed up, he was already gone like smoke fading into the night. He started in Memphis. A scrawny kid with no father, no rules, no hope. Just survival. The streets taught him how to lie before they taught him how to read. By 14, he was already running errands for dealers, pocketing small bills for big risks. By 17, he was robbing corner stores, slipping through police lines, smiling while sirens screamed in the distance. He didn't just survive the streets, he learned how to own them. His name spread not through fame, but fear. Every job was colder than the last. Every move sharper. He never used violence unless he had to, but when he did, it was fast, clean, final. He believed emotion was weakness, and weakness got people killed. He'd seen that firsthand, his mother, strung out, left in a motel on the outskirts of Detroit. He found her 2 days too late. That was the day he stopped being human. From there, he became something else. Something efficient. Something untouchable. Nightclubs in Chicago. Drug houses in Newark. Warehouse deals in Detroit. Everywhere he went, money followed, and blood wasn't far behind. Reporters loved the myth of him. Ghost strikes again. One Chicago Tribune headline read. But they never knew what really drove him. It wasn't greed. It wasn't thrill. It was control. Control made him feel alive. Control was the only thing that silenced the chaos in his head. But the thing about control is that it's only an illusion. One of his old victims, a pawn shop owner in St. Louis, once said on television, "He looked me dead in the eyes and smiled. Not a human smile. Just empty. Like he was looking through me." And maybe that was true. Because by then, he didn't see people anymore. Just pieces in a game. Pieces he could move, break, or discard. 30 felonies. Robbery. Assault. Drug trafficking. Extortion. He'd built an empire of fear, but he never killed. Not once. At least, not officially. Behind the police files, the surveillance tapes, and the mugshots there were whispers. That sometimes people vanished around him. An informant in Memphis. A courier in Chicago. A woman in Detroit who knew too much. Their names were never written down, but everyone knew. He had a rule. No witnesses. No mistakes. But every man with rules eventually breaks them, and that's when the story turns. The deeper truth is this: every crime he committed was connected. Every robbery, every drug route, every name on his payroll, all tied to one man. A man who never appeared in any report. A name that lived in the shadows. The one person he could never outsmart, the one who created him. They called him King. He ran the network that fed half the underground markets across the Midwest. And Ghost, he was King's prized weapon. A protege groomed to do the work no one else could stomach. But Ghost made one mistake. He thought he could leave. He thought he could walk away and build a life without looking back. He was wrong. Leaving King wasn't like quitting a job. It was like betraying a god. And gods, they don't forgive. Years before Houston, Ghost disappeared after a deal went sideways in Detroit. The police thought he'd been killed. But really he'd buried his name, burned every connection, and vanished into the cracks of America. For almost 5 years, there were no sightings. No arrests. Nothing. Just silence. He built a new identity. New life. New city. But King never forgot. And when King wanted something, he always found it. And now, years later, in a quiet corner of Houston, the past had finally caught his scent. You can hide from people. You can hide from the law. But you can't hide from the version of yourself someone else built. Every dollar he made in that mechanic shop, every night he spent pretending to be ordinary, it was all borrowed time. Because the game he'd played for so long was never finished. It was just waiting for the next move. There's something haunting about a man who's lived too many lives. He forgets which one was real. Was he the monster from the streets, or the man fixing engines and trying to be better? Did he ever have a choice, or was he always just someone else's pawn? Some nights, when he couldn't sleep, he'd sit on the porch and watch cars pass by. Each pair of headlights was like a ghost from his past, speeding toward him, then vanishing into the dark. And he knew. It wasn't over. It never would be. He kept telling himself he'd escaped King's world. But escape isn't freedom. Escape is just another kind of prison, one with quieter walls. And every prison has a warden. That warden was coming for him slowly, quietly, patiently. He didn't know when or how or through whom, but he could feel it, that old tension in his gut. The same one he used to feel before a job went bad. It was back. And when the past finally arrived, it didn't knock. It didn't warn. It just slipped in through the cracks just like he used to. He thought he buried that name years ago. He thought the ghost was dead. But he was wrong. The ghost was back. And this time, it wasn't him. Because the name he once feared, the one he thought he'd erased, had just come back to life. And when it did, everything he'd built, everything he'd run from, everything he'd tried to forget, would come crashing down. The call came on a Wednesday night. Detroit area code. He almost didn't answer. But when you've lived your life on the run, silence feels louder than a voice. And this one brought the past rushing back like a wave of gasoline and flame. "Got something for you," the voice said. Smooth, familiar. An old associate. One of King's men. "It's quick, clean, easy money. In and out like the old days." He froze. The words easy money had always been poison to him. But poison has a way of sounding sweet when life's been choking you slow. Bills were piling up. Carla's kindness was starting to feel like charity. And the letters, the threats, hadn't stopped. He could feel the walls closing in, inch by inch. He told himself he'd just listen. He'd say no. He'd walk away. But the thing about ghosts, they don't walk away. They haunt until they're done. And this job, this one, would be the last time he ever answered the phone. The setup was simple. Dallas. A high-end furniture store. Front for cash laundering. He'd done worse. The plan: break in, grab the cash drop, get out before the alarm hits. No guns, no blood, no noise. "Just 1 hour of your time," the voice said, "and you'll never have to look over your shoulder again." But promises like that, they're made in hell, not heaven. He sat alone that night, cigarette smoke curling into the dark. He stared at the phone on the table and thought about every lie he'd told himself. That he'd changed. That he'd escaped. That good people could love a man like him. He thought about Carla. About the way she smiled when she talked about her brother, the one who died before he could turn his life around. He thought about his sister. The way she used to call him T, laughing as if the world was still kind. Before it swallowed her whole. And somewhere between memory and madness, he picked up the phone. He said yes. Every man believes he can sin just one more time. Every man forgets that one more time is how the devil wins. They met 2 days later in an old diner on the edge of Dallas. Coffee thick as mud. Neon lights flickering over tired faces. The crew was small, just 3 men. All familiar. All ghosts from another life. One was Clyde, the triggerman from Detroit. The other, Rico, the one who always smiled when things got ugly. They joked like old friends, but beneath the laughter was the stench of desperation. Each one pretending they weren't already buried. He listened to the plan, nodded when they asked if he still remembered how to disappear. Of course he did. You never forget that. That night, he drove back to Houston. His hands tight on the wheel, knuckles pale. The highway stretched out like a confession, endless, dark, unforgiving. When he got home, Carla was on the porch, waving. He told her he had to leave for a few days, said it was for work. She smiled, told him to stay safe. He almost told her the truth. Almost. But truth, for him, was just another lie waiting to explode. He didn't know it then, but that smile would be the last light before everything went dark. Dallas. Saturday night. Empty streets, neon flickers, the hum of faraway traffic. The air smelled of rain and smoke. The perfect cover. They parked 2 blocks away. Masks. Gloves. Clyde cut the alarm. Rico picked the lock. And Ghost, he watched the clock. Everything was smooth. Professional. Flawless. Until it wasn't. Inside the store, they moved like shadows. Cash in the back room, easy grab. But as he opened the safe, he heard something soft, almost human. A voice. A gasp. He turned. A woman stood at the doorway, young, no older than 22. Wide eyes. A phone in her trembling hand. "Please," she whispered. The sound hit him like a bullet. Because in that instant he saw her. Not her. His sister. Same brown hair. Same fear. Same innocence the world didn't protect. "Go," he said, voice low. But Clyde panicked. Yanked her arm. The phone hit the floor. A scream. A struggle. And then a crack. She fell. Blood on polished tiles. The silence that followed was worse than any siren. He froze, staring at the girl, at the pool of red spreading under her. Everything around him blurred, the sounds, the lights, the air. The world had collapsed into that one image. In 1 second, he'd crossed a line he could never come back from. Rico was shouting. Clyde grabbed the money, yelling to move. He couldn't hear them. Couldn't move. He just kept looking at her face, so still, so quiet. Like his sister all over again. They dragged him out, shoved him into the van. He didn't fight it. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe. The police found the girl 2 hours later. Alive, barely. Her name was Lila. The owner's daughter. A college student home for the weekend. He didn't know that yet. All he knew was the guilt burning in his chest like acid. He sat in a cheap motel off I-30, staring at the bag of money on the bed. $90,000. It looked smaller than he remembered. He thought about the girl's eyes. About the way she looked at him, not with hate, but confusion. As if she saw the man he once was, not the monster he'd become. He tried to pray. He hadn't prayed in years. The words wouldn't come. It was the first time in his life he felt like the hunted, not the hunter. Outside, rain fell hard against the window. He thought about driving away, vanishing again, starting over somewhere new. But you can't outrun the reflection in your own head. He picked up the phone. Called Clyde. No answer. Called Rico. Nothing. Then a text. One line. "She's alive. We're dead." And in that moment, he knew what it meant. King's men had found out. The job wasn't a robbery. It was a test. A setup. And he'd failed it. He looked out at the rain, heart pounding, the sound of sirens faint in the distance, and whispered to himself, "This is it." Because that single moment, that one mistake, would unravel every lie he'd ever lived. That moment, the flash of fear in her eyes, it wasn't just guilt that hit him. It was recognition. He'd seen that look before years ago, in someone he couldn't save. And I'll say this, what he realized in that second is something we all need to understand. Because there's a lesson here. One that could keep your child, your sister, or even your friend from falling into the same trap. I haven't forgotten the promise I made to you earlier. I'll explain exactly how to spot the signs before it's too late. But first, you need to see what happened next. Because sometimes, the warning signs come wearing a familiar face. The morning after the Dallas job, the city woke to chaos. News helicopters circled over flashing lights, yellow tape, and crowds of reporters fighting for a glimpse. A single headline tore through every local broadcast. 30 felonies, and still walking free. Across every station, his face flickered on screen. Grainy footage. A man in a hood, glancing once at the camera before disappearing into the night. The world didn't know his name, but the cops did. And they knew what that look meant. Ghost was back. Detective Harris from Dallas PD had seen it all. Gang murders, drug wars, revenge killings, but this case felt different. It wasn't about greed. It wasn't about rage. It was about something darker. Something personal. The trail started cold. No fingerprints. No clear motive. No trace of where he'd gone. But every ghost leaves behind a shadow. And this one was just bright enough to follow. They found the first clue in a dumpster behind a motel, torn gloves, a trace of blood, and a hotel receipt dated the night before. It led them north to a small motel in Houston, where a witness said a man matching his description paid cash and asked for a room at the back. No ID. No questions. But the clerk remembered one thing, his eyes. Calm, cold, like a man already living his own funeral. From there, the hunt began. Dallas PD linked with detectives in Atlanta, the same team who'd once chased him years earlier. The same people who thought they'd buried his case long ago. Now, He was back in their file's red circle. Bold letters. Active threat. Maps stretched across the walls. Pins in Houston, Memphis, Little Rock. String lines connecting every move. Photos. License plates. Bank records. He was moving, but not fast. Not hiding. It was like he wanted to be seen. Harris couldn't explain it. No one could. Why would a man like him with 30 felonies and a lifetime of running suddenly leave breadcrumbs? They watched security tapes from a gas station in Arkansas. There he was buying cigarettes, looking right into the camera before leaving. A deliberate stare. A message. It wasn't a manhunt anymore. It was an invitation. As the story spread, so did the anger. News anchors demanded answers. How does a man like this walk free? How many chances before the system breaks? Public outrage boiled over. People wanted blood, and they didn't care whose. Meanwhile, he was still moving. Still breathing. Still waiting. He changed motels every 2 nights. Paid in cash. Used fake names. Never the same car twice. But there was something different about this run. He wasn't trying to disappear. He was circling. Back and forth between states, like he was orbiting something only he could see. Harris noticed it first. The pattern wasn't random, it was deliberate. Each motel, each stop, each diner he visited was within 20 miles of someone from his past. Old partners. Informants. People connected to King's network. And one by one they started vanishing. Every ghost has unfinished business, and he was cleaning house. Detectives found a burned car outside Memphis. Inside, traces of DNA matched to Clyde. No body. No signs of struggle. Just a bullet casing and a lighter engraved with a single letter. T. Rico turned up 2 days later in an alley in Little Rock, alive, but barely. He told police what happened before slipping into a coma. He found us, he whispered, but he wasn't running. That line stayed with Harris. He wasn't running. Because fugitives flee. But Ghost was doing something else. He was waiting. The FBI joined in, coordinating across state lines. Surveillance units, wiretaps, anonymous tips flooding hotlines. And then a break. Bank security footage from Houston. A man walks in, deposits a thick envelope of cash, then leaves without a word. Facial recognition hit instantly. It was him. Older, thinner, but unmistakable. By the time they traced the deposit, it was too late. The money had been transferred anonymously to a hospital fund in Dallas. The same hospital where the girl from the robbery, Lila, was still recovering. Guilt was a strange thing for a man like him, but it had finally found him. Investigators were stunned. Why would he send money to his victim's family? Why risk exposure just to make a silent confession? It didn't fit the man they knew. But maybe that was the point. Harris called it the trail of a ghost, because it felt less like a chase and more like a story being written in reverse, one clue leading back to where it all began. And every clue whispered the same message. He wasn't hiding. He was surrendering. The manhunt grew louder. More cities joined. The media turned him into a myth again, a legend of crime and conscience. Talk shows debated his motives. Was he running from justice or from himself? The internet called him the remorseful ghost. And yet he stayed silent. No statements. No confessions. Just movement. Always just out of reach. Then one night, in a small gas station outside Baton Rouge, it ended. A highway patrol officer recognized the car. Old model sedan. Rust on the doors. He called it in. Backup arrived. 5 minutes later, they had the place surrounded. He stepped out slowly. No gun. No struggle. No words. Just a faint smile. The officer shouted, hands raised, ready for a fight. But he just stood there, calm, quiet, almost relieved. Harris would later say it was the strangest arrest of his career. He didn't flinch, didn't look scared. He just looked tired. They cuffed him. Read his rights. And when one officer asked why he didn't run, he simply said, maybe I've been running in the wrong direction. But as the detectives drove him away, Harris couldn't shake the feeling. That smile, that quiet, knowing smile, it wasn't surrender. It was something else. Because sometimes, a man doesn't get caught by accident. Sometimes he walked straight into the hands of justice, to lead it somewhere darker. He smiled when they caught him, not because he was free, but because he knew the system that made him was still walking free. If you're tired of seeing criminals slip through cracks built by broken systems, smash that like button right now. Only those who protect injustice would stay silent after hearing this. Comment: justice isn't blind, it's broken. If you believe the truth should never hide behind paperwork. And share this video because exposing the game means nothing if people stop watching the players. The next move? It's not the police's, it's his. Before the headlines, before the name Ghost meant fear, there was a boy. A small boy sleeping under the old bridge off South Ashland Avenue in Chicago. Cold concrete beneath him. The sound of trains above. And the kind of silence only hunger understands. He grew up in foster homes that changed more often than the seasons. Each house had a new set of rules. A new face pretending to care. He learned quickly that love came with strings, and those strings always pulled tight. He stopped calling anyone mom by the time he was 9. But there was one person he never let go of: his sister, Naomi. Naomi was 2 years older, fierce and unbreakable, in a way only desperate love can make you. She'd hold his hand at night, whispering, "We're not staying here forever." She believed in a version of him that didn't exist yet. One that smiled, one that didn't steal, one that didn't have to fight to eat. He used to believe her until the night the system failed them for the last time. They were 14 and 16 when Naomi aged out. The foster family didn't want her anymore. She packed her things, promised she'd come back for him, and walked out into the rain. That was the last time he saw her alive. They found her body 3 days later in an alley behind a nightclub on the south side. Overdose. Wrong crowd. Wrong place. Wrong time. He didn't cry. He didn't even go to the funeral. He just stopped being the boy she loved and became the man the world feared. Every criminal has an origin story. His started with a broken promise. Years later, during one of his parole meetings, his officer asked him a simple question. "Why do you keep doing this, Terrence?" He leaned back in the chair, tired eyes, calloused hands, and said quietly, "I never wanted to be this." That line haunted the officer for years, and it haunted him too. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the layers of violence and anger, there was still that boy, the one Naomi believed in. Now, sitting in an interrogation room in Dallas, his wrists cuffed, the light harsh and unkind, he looked less like a monster, and more like a man drowning in his own guilt. He didn't ask for a lawyer. Didn't fight the charges. He just stared at the wall, silent, until Detective Harris slid a photo across the table. The girl, Lila, alive but scarred, still fighting for her life. He stared at the image for a long time. And then, for the first time in years, he spoke. "What do you need to know?" And just like that, the hunter became the informant. He started talking, slowly at first, then all at once. Names, routes, bank accounts, safe houses. He mapped out the network he once helped build from Detroit to Miami. Every dealer, every money launderer, every enforcer still loyal to King. The room fell silent. Every word he spoke was a nail in someone else's coffin, and in his own. He told them where the drugs moved, how the shipments were disguised, where the dirty money was cleaned. And as he talked, something shifted in his voice. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was exhaustion. It was confession. It was the sound of a man trying, for once, to make something right. Harris noticed it. The way his eyes softened when he spoke about Lila. The way his voice cracked when he said her name. Maybe it reminded him of Naomi. Maybe it reminded him of the humanity he'd buried long ago. Because guilt, real guilt, doesn't come from being caught. It comes from remembering who you were before you became the villain. Over the next week, he sat through endless interviews. Federal agents, state investigators. Everyone wanted a piece of the information he held. They called it cooperation. But to him, it felt more like confession. He told them about King, the man no one had ever seen, but everyone feared. About the orders that came without names, the threats that came without faces. He described how the empire worked silent, efficient, unstoppable, and how he had once been proud to be part of it. Now, he was helping dismantle it, brick by brick. But redemption isn't clean. It never is. The more he talked, the more he remembered. Every name he gave was a memory he couldn't forget. Every deal he exposed was another ghost dragging him down. Sometimes, late at night, when the lights dimmed and the agents left, he'd sit in the cell and whisper Naomi's name, like she could still hear him. Like forgiveness was something that might come if he just spoke softly enough. He began writing letters to Leela's family, to his victims, to no one in particular. He didn't send them. He just folded them neatly and hid them under the mattress. Harris found one. It read, "I know what I've done. I can't undo it. But maybe, if I tell the truth, someone else won't have to live it." Maybe. For the first time, he wanted to do something right. The investigation stretched for months. Raids in multiple states. Dozens of arrests. Millions in cash seized. The empire King built began to crumble, all because one man finally spoke. But every revelation came with a cost. Whispers spread in the prison net. King's loyalists wanted revenge. Word got out, Ghost turned rat. Harris tried to keep him safe, but there are some places you can't hide a man like that. Too many enemies. Too many debts unpaid. Still, he didn't stop talking. Didn't ask for protection. Didn't flinch when he heard what they planned to do. Maybe he thought this was how it should end, telling the truth before the truth killed him. And deep down, Harris knew it wasn't courage driving him. It was guilt. The kind that eats you alive and leaves nothing but confession behind. But guilt isn't redemption. And good deeds can't wash away blood. Because somewhere out there in the dark corners of the same cities he once ruled, King was still watching. And for every secret he exposed, there was a price to be paid. A price that was already on its way. The breakthrough didn't come from a confession, it came from a file. A single folder buried in a digital archive that no one had touched in years. Marked with one word. King. Detective Harris sat in the dim light of the evidence room, scrolling through page after page, wire transfers, coded messages, offshore accounts. And there it was. A name. Terrence Ghost Reed. And under it, a series of transactions dated before the Dallas heist. Money that was never his. Deposits that tied him to crimes that hadn't even happened yet. It wasn't a robbery. It was a setup. The fall had been planned long before he took the first step. When Harris brought him the file, he didn't flinch. Didn't deny it. Didn't even look surprised. He just nodded slowly and said, "I told you, I was never supposed to walk away." The realization hit hard. The robbery wasn't about the money. It was about erasing him. A man who knew too much, finally made disposable. Ghost leaned forward, wrists chained to the table, eyes cold but clear. "They framed me because I broke the rule," he said. "What rule?" Harris asked. He paused. "The one that says you don't leave the family." That word family didn't mean blood. It meant debt. It meant silence. It meant King. And in that world, silence wasn't loyalty, it was survival. The Dallas heist had been staged to look like just another job gone wrong. But behind the curtain, it was part of something bigger. The bank accounts, the routes, the stolen money, all of it connected to shell corporations across Miami, Atlanta, and New Jersey. A web spun so tight that even the FBI hadn't seen it for what it was. Ghost wasn't the target of the investigation, he was the distraction. The noise that kept eyes off the real crime. Millions laundered. Trafficking routes protected. Politicians paid off. And when he disappeared after the job, they made sure the evidence led right back to him. He showed Harris the proof. Bank records he'd hidden years earlier. Ledgers from deals he'd run under King's command. Names of men still walking free, untouchable by law, because their fingerprints never touched the dirt. As Harris listened, he realized this wasn't just a redemption story. It was an exposé. A man the world had called a monster was now the key to burning down the empire that made him one. But even fire needs permission to burn. When news broke that Ghost was cooperating, the system went into chaos. Agents questioned motives. Lawyers scrambled. Everyone wanted a piece of the truth, but no one wanted to own it. Harris warned him, "You talk too much. You die in here." Ghost smirked. "If I don't talk, I die forgotten." He was caught between two deaths, one of silence, one of exposure. Either way, the end was written. The FBI took over. They verified the accounts, tracked the offshore money, uncovered connections between King's network and legitimate businesses, shipping, logistics, private contracting firms. It was bigger than anyone imagined. Decades of corruption hidden under the guise of street crime. And in every thread they pulled, King's name whispered back, but never his face, never his voice. He'd built an empire that ruled from the shadows. And Ghost was the only man who'd ever seen the whole picture. Every secret has a cost, and he was about to pay it in full. Late one night, Harris found him sitting in the interrogation room, alone, staring at the wall. No guards, no cuffs. Just a man deep in thought. "You ever wonder," Ghost said quietly, "why they let me get away so many times?" Harris frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked up, eyes tired. "They weren't letting me escape. They were letting me run their errands." The truth landed heavy. Every arrest, every release, every second chance. It was all orchestrated. He'd been a ghost, yes, but one created by the system itself. His 30 felonies weren't oversight. They were leverage. Every time they needed something done, he was the man they sent. Every time they needed someone blamed, he was the name they used. He wasn't escaping the system, he was built into it. The room felt colder after that. The kind of chill that comes when you realize the villain wasn't acting alone. The monster was a product designed, controlled, and discarded. He told Harris about the night before the Dallas job. The phone call from Detroit. The way the voice said, "One last job." He realized now it wasn't an offer. It was a warning. King's men knew he'd broken the code years ago. They just waited for the perfect stage to bury him. And Dallas was it a clean, public fall that would erase his legacy and protect theirs. He leaned back, looking up at the ceiling. "They made me a ghost," he whispered, "and then tried to exorcise me." Harris asked him what he wanted now. He smiled faintly. "I want them to remember my name. And I want King to remember ghosts don't rest easy." He wasn't looking for forgiveness anymore. He was looking for reckoning. The next morning, he handed Harris a small notebook. Inside, handwritten coordinates. Meeting places in Miami, Atlanta, and New Orleans. Each one a graveyard of deals and betrayals. It was enough to take down half of King's operation. Enough to start a war. But Harris hesitated. "Once this gets out," he said, "they'll come for you. You know that, right?" Ghost nodded. "They already have." And that's when Harris noticed it, the faint red dot of a laser flickering across the blinds. The shot shattered the glass before anyone could react. Agents ducked. Screams filled the corridor. When the dust settled, Ghost was still sitting, calm as ever, blood dripping from his shoulder. He looked at Harris and whispered, "I told you, they don't forgive." Outside, sirens wailed as the building went on lockdown. And somewhere, deep in the dark alleys of Miami, King smiled. Because the ghost hadn't been silenced yet. He'd just been marked. He was finally starting to see the truth that monsters don't just appear overnight. They're built, piece by piece, by everything and everyone that looks the other way. And that's what makes this story more than just a crime. It's a mirror showing us what happens when protection fails before danger even arrives. I didn't forget the promise I made to you. In a few minutes, I'll show you the lesson buried inside this chaos, how to protect your family from becoming the next headline. Keep watching, because what's coming next will hit closer to home than you think. Sometimes, the scariest part of a story is realizing it could have been yours. The courtroom was full before sunrise. Reporters filled every seat. Camera flashes cracked through the silence like lightning. Everyone wanted to see the man who'd been a ghost for 2 decades now finally stepping into the light. When he entered, shackled, head low, the room went still. The sound of his chains echoed off the marble walls, loud enough to drown out the whispers. Every cop, every agent, every journalist, they all wanted to know the same thing. Would he finally speak? The man who built his life on silence was about to break it, and when he did, the world would split open. He sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped, eyes steady. The prosecution lined up their papers, but today wasn't about them. It was about him. A monster turned messenger, a sinner turned witness, and a system about to be exposed by its own creation. Detective Harris sat in the second row, his jaw tight. He had seen men confess before, for money, for deals, for survival. But never like this. There was something different about the way Ghost looked at the world that morning. as if he'd already accepted that this was his final day as a free soul. When the judge called his name, the courtroom buzzed. He stood slow, deliberate, and for the first time in his life, he faced the world without a mask. His voice was low at first, rough, almost hesitant. "My name is Terrence Reed." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The ghost had spoken. The myth had a name. He told the court everything. From the streets of Memphis to the clubs of Chicago. From the robberies to the deals that paid off cops and politicians alike. He spoke names, powerful names. Men in suits who'd smiled on television while blood ran through their city's gutters. Officers who'd taken bribes to look the other way. Judges who'd turned guilty into innocent with the stroke of a pen. He didn't stutter. He didn't hide. Every word was a nail in the coffin of corruption. He wasn't confessing to save himself, he was confessing to bury an empire. The courtroom shifted from shock to disbelief. One of the names he mentioned, a police commissioner from Atlanta, stormed out before the testimony ended. Another, a senator from Florida, was escorted out by federal agents that same afternoon. The news spread like wildfire. The man who never spoke finally told the truth. Every network played the clip. Every headline screamed betrayal and justice in the same breath. But the confession didn't stop at corruption. It went deeper. Darker. He spoke of King, the man behind the mask. The one who ruled from the shadows, while men like Terrence took the blame. He described the way the organization fed off chaos, planting dealers in neighborhoods already broken, funding violence to justify policing budgets, and laundering the profits through government contracts. He painted a picture that made the courtroom go silent. It wasn't just crime. It was a machine. A cycle that thrived on misery, one he'd been both victim and accomplice to. Then came the moment that changed everything. He turned to face the judge. And in front of the nation, he said, "I did everything they said I did, and worse. But the truth is, I didn't do it alone. None of us did. The system made me, and now it's devouring itself." He wasn't just putting himself on trial, he was putting the entire justice system there beside him. As the courtroom sat frozen, a man stood quietly from the gallery. It was Lila's father. The man whose daughter had been caught in the crossfire of Terrence's last crime. His hands trembled, but his eyes didn't. He watched Terrence for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not in approval. Not in friendship. But in acknowledgement, a silent act of forgiveness that broke whatever was left of the man once called Ghost. Terrence's voice cracked for the first time. "I just wanted it to end," he said softly. The words weren't for the judge, or the lawyers, or the cameras. They were for her, for Naomi, for Lila, for every name that haunted him in the dark. Harris, sitting at the back, felt something shift inside him. He'd hunted this man for years. And yet, watching him now, he realized Terrence wasn't the villain anymore. He was the evidence. Living proof that monsters are made, not born. The prosecutor tried to interrupt, demanding proof of the corruption claims. Terrence looked at him, and with a small, almost weary smile, said, "You'll find it in your office, third drawer, left side." The courtroom erupted. Agents stormed from the back, cell phones ringing, whispers cutting through the air. Within an hour, that same office was raided, and inside, exactly where he said, they found records linking officials to King's network. He didn't just confess to a crime, he tore open an entire system. By nightfall, the headlines had changed again. What began as a trial had turned into a national scandal. Hundreds of arrests. Resignations. Cities bracing for the fallout. But inside the courtroom, Terrence sat still, his expression unreadable. The chaos outside didn't matter anymore. He'd done what he came to do. As the judge read the verdict, he didn't flinch. Life without parole. No chance of appeal. He nodded once, not as a criminal accepting punishment, but as a man accepting peace. Reporters shouted questions as he was led away. "Do you regret it? Do you think you can be forgiven?" He didn't answer. He just looked up toward the crowd, toward the world, and said, "Forgiveness isn't mine to ask for." And as they took him away, the last camera flash caught his eyes, calm, steady, and almost free. Because somewhere, beyond the prison walls, his confession was still echoing, shaking the foundations of power, exposing the faces behind the masks, and proving one thing to everyone watching. Sometimes it takes the guilty to make the world see who's really innocent. He stood there confessing to everything. But his words didn't just destroy himself, they exposed the very people who once called him a monster. If you believe no system should protect the corrupt, hit subscribe now. Only those with something to hide would look away from this kind of truth. Share this story with someone who still believes justice is simple. Because sometimes, the biggest villains wear badges, not masks. And what he revealed next would change everything. The verdict was read in a room so silent you could hear the paper tremble in the judge's hands. Life without parole. No appeals. No negotiations. Just a full stop on a life that had been nothing but commas of chaos and consequence. He didn't react. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. It was as if he'd been waiting for this sentence his entire life, not as punishment, but as peace. Detective Harris stood at the back, watching him being led away. In his final report, he wrote one line that would go on to headline every newspaper. He started as a monster, he ended as a man. But the truth about redemption is that it always comes with a price. Weeks turned into months. And inside the gray walls of Huntsville Penitentiary, something began to change. Gone was the name Ghost. No one whispered it anymore. Now they called him Teach. He spent his mornings in the prison library, the same place most inmates went only to escape the noise. But he wasn't hiding. He was building. He taught younger inmates to read men who came in angry, broken, illiterate, the same way he once had. He showed them how to write letters home, how to file petitions, how to talk instead of fight. He became the man he wished he'd met at 16. One of the guards once said, "You'd never guess what he was." And another replied, "That's the point. Sometimes the most dangerous men become the ones who save others from becoming like them." Outside the prison, the world kept moving. The victim's father, Lila's father, surprised everyone when he declined media interviews. He didn't want fame or revenge. He wanted change. He founded a non-profit organization called the Lila Foundation for Youth Reform. Its mission, to prevent kids from ending up like the man who took his daughter's future. And he said something that echoed in the nation's conscience. If one broken man can rebuild from inside a cage, then maybe we can rebuild the streets that made him. The press loved it. The story of opposites, forgiveness and guilt, side by side. And for the first time in years, Terrence Reed's name wasn't followed by the word criminal. It was followed by hope. But even hope has its limits, especially when it's born in chains. He began writing letters, hundreds of them, to the families of his victims, to his sister's old social worker, to reporters, to lawmakers, to anyone who would listen. He didn't ask for sympathy. He just told the truth. "I don't want forgiveness," he wrote once. "I want the next boy with my story to have another ending." Those letters started circulating. Some landed in the hands of journalists. Others ended up in classrooms. Teachers began using his story as a case study, not in crime, but in change. The media called him the convict who cleaned the streets. Documentaries were made. Opinion pieces debated whether redemption like his could ever be real. But inside those walls, the attention didn't matter. He wasn't chasing headlines anymore. He was chasing peace. Because when you've spent your life running, stillness feels like salvation. One winter morning, Harris visited him. The prison was quiet, the air sharp. They sat across from each other, the detective and the criminal who had once been his obsession. "You did more damage with the truth than you ever did with a gun," Harris said. Terrence chuckled softly. "Funny. All I had to do was stop lying." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was understanding. It was finality. Before Harris left, Terrence looked up and asked, "Do they ever stop calling me what I was?" Harris shook his head. "No, but they might start remembering who you became." But even redemption can't outrun the ghosts it awakens. Over the next few years, his health declined. Prison takes more than freedom, it takes time. His hair grayed early. His handwriting grew shaky. And one morning, he didn't show up to the library. They found him in his cell, sitting at the desk, pen still in hand. On the paper, a half-written letter addressed simply, "To whoever still believes." The warden announced his death quietly. No cameras. No reporters. Just a man who'd once lived loudly, now leaving quietly. But before they cleared his cell, a guard found an envelope, sealed in red wax, tucked inside his Bible. It was addressed to Detective Harris. When Harris opened it, the words inside cut deeper than any confession. I told you there was one more name. You'll find it where this all began, under the bridge in Chicago. The truth didn't die with me. Even in death, the ghost wasn't done haunting the living. Harris drove to Chicago that night. The bridge was still there, weathered, silent, forgotten. Beneath it, he found a rusted box buried under stones and dirt. Inside, photos, receipts, letters, evidence no one had ever seen. And in those papers, a name. Not King. Not any of the men they'd already arrested. Someone higher. Someone untouchable. A senator. The same senator Terrence had once worked for under a fake identity, years before the crimes even began. The same man who had funded King's network from behind polished speeches and charity galas. Harris stood there in the cold Chicago wind, holding that file, realizing the case was far from over. Terrence Reed may have died behind bars, but the system he broke open was still bleeding. And somewhere, in the marble halls of Washington, another ghost was waiting to be named. He was a free man after 30 felonies, but his last crime changed everything. Not because of the blood spilled or the lives lost, but because, for the first time in his life, someone finally listened. When you strip away the mugshots, the headlines, the crimes, what's left is a boy who never had a chance. A kid who learned survival before compassion, punishment before patience, and silence before love. The real story here isn't about a criminal who confessed, it's about a system that never cared until it was too late. Across every city he ever touched, from Chicago to Memphis, from Houston to Dallas, there are thousands more just like him. Boys on the edge of becoming men. Men on the edge of losing everything. And all it takes is one moment, one decision, to tip the balance. Terrence Reed's story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a reflection of what happens when society waits until the crime is committed to start caring. We spend billions on punishment, but pennies on prevention. We fear the criminals we create instead of understanding how we created them. And maybe that's the greatest crime of all. When you look at his life from start to end, the pattern is painfully clear. Every time he reached out for help, no one was there. Every time he fell, the only hands that pulled him up were the ones dragging him deeper into the streets. By the time someone finally saw the human beneath the record, it was already too late to save him. But you, listening to this, you can still make a difference. You can still stop another story like his from being written. Because this isn't just about murder and redemption. It's about awareness. It's about paying attention before the world breaks someone beyond repair. Every tragedy starts as a warning sign that someone ignored. So here's the lesson we all missed. The danger isn't just in crime itself. It's in what happens before it. The silence, the neglect, the lack of direction. When a child grows up without structure, without care, without purpose, the streets become their teacher. And the streets have only one curriculum: survival. But survival comes with rules. Cruel ones. The kind that trade innocence for armor. And by the time they realize what they've become, the mirror's already cracked. So what do we do now? We start where no one ever started with him. We listen. We look closer. We rebuild before the damage is done. Pay attention to the signs of desperation, the sudden silence, the anger that masks pain, the disinterest that hides hopelessness. These aren't random. They're the early warnings of a person slipping away. Support programs that rebuild lives, not just punish them. The world doesn't need more prisons, it needs more purpose. Because the truth is, you can't heal what you only punish. Redemption starts long before the courtroom, but most never get that chance. If there's one thing Terrence's story proved, it's that even the most broken can still build. He didn't erase his past, he repurposed it. Turned pain into lesson, shame into reflection, and guilt into guidance. He may have been condemned by law, but he was redeemed by choice. And maybe that's what makes his story so unforgettable. Because deep down, he became the man he'd always needed, just too late to save himself. So the next time you see someone struggling, don't turn away. Don't wait for them to hit the headline. Reach before they fall. Teach compassion before judgment. Because empathy costs nothing, but it can save everything. And maybe, just maybe, the next story won't end behind bars. He was a free man after 30 felonies, but freedom was never about walls or chains. It was about truth. And he found it too late. But we don't have to. If you believe people can change, hit subscribe. Only those who defend corruption stay silent. Share this story, Because someone out there needs to hear it before they make their first mistake. Because sometimes, the last crime isn't the end. It's the beginning of truth. And as long as we keep telling these stories, maybe one day, there'll be no ghosts left to haunt the next generation. You've heard the story. You've seen how a single choice, one desperate moment, can destroy every life it touches. Now here's the lesson I promised you. If you want to protect your loved ones from becoming victims, you need to start before danger ever shows up. Because the truth is, no one is ever just fine before they disappear. Lesson number 1. Learn the early warning signs. Isolation, sudden changes in routine, fear of going out, a partner who controls where they go or who they talk to. These are never small things. They're red flags, signals of manipulation or abuse in the making. Lesson number 2. Build communication before crisis. Make it normal for your loved ones to talk about discomfort, not just danger. Let them know that if something feels wrong, they can speak, and you'll believe them. Lesson number 3. Teach prevention, not paranoia. It's not about fear, it's about awareness. Teach kids how to recognize grooming behaviors, and teach adults to trust their instincts when someone feels off. Because predators don't always lurk in alleys sometimes, they smile at family dinners. Lesson number 4. Act on your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't wait. Check in, intervene, call for help. The cost of overreacting is small, the cost of silence can be fatal. Lesson number 5. Strengthen community watch. A safe neighborhood isn't about fences, it's about connection. Know your neighbors. Share information. Look out for each other's kids. Because the first line of defense is never the police, it's us. You can't rewrite this story, but you can stop another one like it from ever being written. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, for feeling, and for caring. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're warnings written in real pain. If you believe people can change or that justice should mean more than punishment, subscribe now. Only those who defend corruption stay silent. Like this video if you want to see more real stories that dig deeper than headlines. Comment, "Truth matters," if you believe the world needs more of it. And share this story because somewhere out there, someone's about to make their first mistake. And your share might just stop it. Now before you go check out our previous videos, each one tells a story that the world tried to forget. But here, we remember. Because sometimes, the last crime isn't the end. It's the beginning of truth.